The mansion throbbed with the bass line of a popular song, its ornate chandeliers trembling under the weight of the music. The living room was a sea of flashing strobe lights, spilled drinks, and half-shouted conversations. Wealthy teens draped in designer outfits stumbled over each other, their laughter rising above the music like a discordant chorus. In the corner, a group passed around a bottle of something expensive, its label glinting under the lights as they cheered each gulp. Claire stood by the grand staircase, her fingers wrapped tightly around a red solo cup. She sipped the watered-down vodka, her gaze darting across the room. A pang of envy cut through her chest as she watched Amber, effortlessly beautiful and holding court in the center of the room, toss her head back in laughter. Claire adjusted her sequin dress, feeling invisible despite the glittering fabric. She glanced at her phone, considering a quick escape, but a booming voice interrupted her thoughts. "Ethan's here," Jake announced, smirking as he leaned against the marble pillar. Claire's heart sank. Turning her head, she saw Ethan lingering in the doorway, his shoulders hunched under a plain hoodie. The only thing out of place in the room wasn't the mansion or the extravagant chaos. It was him. Ethan scanned the room, his face a mask of discomfort. The sharp scent of alcohol and sweat hit him like a wall. A few partygoers whispered and giggled, their glances stabbing like needles. "Why is he even here?" Amber whispered, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Claire bit her lip. She wanted to intervene, to say something. Instead, she stayed silent, her fingers tightening around her cup. She couldn't afford Conond to be on the receiving end of their ridicule. Not again. Jake sauntered up to Ethan, clapping him on the shoulder. "Glad you could make it, man," he said, his grin anything but friendly. "All right, everyone, listen up." Jake's voice carried over the music, silencing the room. He stood on a plush couch, his arms outstretched like a conductor commanding an orchestra. "Let's kick this party up a notch. Scavenger hunt time." Amber giggled, already tipsy. "What kind of scavenger hunt?" Jake's eyes gleamed. "We've got a hidden room in the basement. First one to find the treasure wins. But," he paused dramatically, "we need someone to guard it. Ethan, you up for the challenge?" Ethan blinked, unsure how to respond. The crowd watched him expectantly, their faces lit with thinly veiled malice. Claire felt her stomach twist. "This isn't funny," she whispered to herself, but her voice was drowned out by the cheers of approval. Jake jumped down, slinging an arm around Ethan. "Come on, it'll be fun. Trust me." The basement hallway stretched out like a gaping mouth, its dim lighting flickering ominously. Ethan hesitated at the top of the stairs, looking over his shoulder. "You coming?" Jake asked, his tone impatient. Ethan swallowed hard and followed. Claire stood at the top of the staircase, watching as the group descended into the shadows. Jake's laugh echoed up the stairwell, sharp and hollow. "Don't do this," she whispered. But again, her words went unheard. The heavy door creaked as it swung shut. Jake leaned against it, his grin widening as he slid the lock into place. "Guys?" Ethan's voice was muffled but audible. "What's going on?" The group erupted in laughter. "Relax, Ethan," Jake called out, rapping his knuckles against the door. "We'll be back in a bit." The sound of Ethan's fists pounding against the door chased them up the stairs. Claire trailed behind, her chest tight. She glanced back once, catching a glimpse of the locked door, before the shadows swallowed it. By midnight, the party had descended into full-blown chaos. A fight broke out near the pool. Someone shattered a glass table, and a girl sobbed on the stairs as her mascara streaked her cheeks. Claire sat alone on the patio, her head in her hands. She couldn't shake the sound of Ethan's voice. The way he'd called out, unsure but trusting, replayed in her mind like a haunting melody. Jake stumbled onto the patio, a bottle dangling from his hand. "Lighten up, Claire," he slurred, dropping into the seat beside her. "It's just a joke." She didn't respond, her eyes fixed on the horizon as the first hint of dawn broke through the darkness. The mansion was eerily quiet the next morning. Sunlight streamed through the shattered windows, highlighting the mess of discarded cups, broken furniture, and sleeping bodies. Amber nudged Jake awake. "Hey, have you seen Ethan?" Jake groaned, rubbing his eyes. "He's still in the basement. Probably pissed." The words hit Claire like a punch to the gut. She bolted up from the couch, her heart pounding. The group followed her to the basement, their steps hesitant as reality began to set in. Jake unlocked the door, his smirk fading the moment it swung open. The room was empty. The walls were smeared with blood, and the silence was deafening. "Oh my God," Amber whispered, backing away. Claire stepped inside, her stomach churning. The air was thick with the metallic tang of blood. A single chilling thought gripped her. What have we done? The crystal chandelier cast fractured rainbows across the glossy floors of the Kensington estate. The opulence screamed perfection, but Claire Kensington felt the emptiness seep into her skin as she descended the grand staircase. Her mother, a statuesque woman in an immaculate navy dress, glanced up from her laptop. "Claire, shoulders back. You're slouching again." "Good morning to you too," Claire muttered under her breath, adjusting her posture as though she were a mannequin. "Don't sulk," her mother chided. "Remember, the McAllisters are coming for dinner next week. Try to smile more. No one likes a moody teenager." Claire nodded absently, her gaze fixed on the sprawling garden outside. The perfectly trimmed hedges mirrored her life, sculpted and controlled, with no room for imperfection. At school, her isolation was stark. She lingered by the lockers pretending to text, her heart aching for the validation she saw other girls receive so easily. As the popular crowd swirled past her, she tightened her grip on her phone, a lifeline to nothing. The laughter around Jake was magnetic. He was the sun, and everyone else orbited him. Leaning against his matte black Maserati, Jake flashed his signature smirk. "Come on, Claire," he said, tossing a bottle of sparkling water her way. "Lighten up. You're always so serious." Claire caught the bottle, her cheeks warming under his piercing gaze. "Maybe I just don't find your jokes funny." The crowd chuckled nervously, and Jake's smirk faltered for the briefest second. "That's because you've never been in on the real fun," he said, his tone honeyed, but his eyes hard. Later, alone in his bedroom, Jake stared at a picture frame on his nightstand. His father's sharp features mirrored his own, but where his father's eyes were stern, Jake's held a glimmer of desperation. He ran his fingers over the glass, the memory of bruises and shouted threats seeping into his mind. The smell of turpentine clung to Ethan's clothes as he hunched over a half-finished canvas in the school's deserted art room. His strokes were furious, the colors chaotic, a kaleidoscope of emotions he couldn't articulate. "Still hiding in here?" a voice called from the doorway. Ethan turned, startled to see Claire. Her hesitant smile stirred a flicker of warmth in him, a reminder of simpler times. Not hiding, just thinking. he replied, capping his paintbrush. Claire stepped closer, her fingers brushing the edge of the canvas. You're talented, Ethan. I mean it. Thanks, he said, his tone cautious. Haven't heard that in a while. An awkward silence stretched between them before Claire sighed. I miss this, talking to you. It feels real. Ethan's heart ached at her words. Then why did you leave? The laughter in Jake's living room was forced, like champagne bubbles moments before they fizzled out. The group lounged in the plush, overstuffed couches, their conversations punctuated by pointed glances and veiled insults. Anyone else think Jake's scavenger hunt is just an excuse to show off his house again? Sophia quipped, swirling her drink. Jake grinned, his tone playful but biting. Jealous, Soph? I'd let you move in if you asked nicely. Claire watched the exchange, discomfort gnawing at her. She felt like a piece on a chessboard, maneuvered and cornered by invisible hands. Ethan sat apart, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. He wasn't part of their games, but tonight, something told him he wouldn't escape them either. The Kensington mansion was a labyrinth, its grandeur marred by the eerie silence that hung in its halls. Portraits of long-dead ancestors stare down from gilded frames, their eyes following the group as they wandered. Jake gestured grandly toward a hidden door in the library. Here's a little secret for you. Every good house has a mystery, right? The group crowded closer, their excitement palpable. Only Claire hung back, her gaze flickering to Ethan. He noticed her unease and gave her a small, reassuring nod. Jake clapped his hands together, commanding everyone's attention. All right, here's the deal. Scavenger hunt starts now, pair up, and the first team to find the hidden treasure wins. What's the treasure? Claire asked, her voice tinged with suspicion. Jake smirked, his eyes glinting with mischief. That's for you to find out? As the group scattered, Claire found herself paired with Ethan. She glanced at him, her unease deepening. Something about this feels wrong, she admitted softly. Ethan hesitated before replying. It's Jake. Everything he does has a twist. We should stick together. Their whispered exchange was drowned out by the sound of footsteps echoing through the mansion's cavernous halls. Jake's voice echoed through the dim hallway as he leaned against the thick wooden door, grinning. Relax, Ethan. It's just a joke, he said, his tone dripping with mock reassurance. The group erupted into laughter, the sound bouncing off the cold stone walls. Claire stood at the back, her arms folded tightly across her chest. Her stomach churned as she watched Ethan pound on the door from the other side, his voice muffled but frantic. Guys, come on, Claire said hesitantly, her voice barely cutting through the laughter. We should let him out. Jake turned to her, his smile sharp. What's the matter, Claire? Feeling soft? Sophia giggled, draping herself over one of the couches. Claire's always been a buzzkill, she teased. The sting of their mockery silenced Claire. Her protest died on her lips as Jake waved dismissively. He'll be fine, Jake said. Come on, let's get back to the party. Reluctantly, Claire followed, the pounding from behind the door fading into the distance. Music pulsed through the mansion, shaking the ornate chandeliers. Bottles littered every surface, their contents sloshing onto the expensive Persian rugs. Claire sat alone on the edge of a velvet armchair, nursing a half-empty glass of soda. Around her, the group devolved into chaos, Sophia and Lucas locked in a heated argument, Jake holding court with a circle of sycophants. To the best prank of the century, Jake toasted, his words slurred. Claire's anxiety gnawed at her, Her gaze drifted toward the hallway, leading back to the hidden room. The pounding had stopped hours ago, but unease clung to her like a second skin. "Everything okay?" a voice asked. She looked up to see Sophia, her mascara smudged. Yeah," Claire lied, forcing a smile. "Just tired." But the weight of her guilt pressed heavier with every passing second. Inside the hidden room, darkness swallowed Ethan whole. His breath came in ragged gasps as he stumbled blindly, his fingers scraping against the rough stone walls. "Help!" he shouted, his voice hoarse. Panic gripped him as he realized no one was coming back. He threw his weight against the door, but it didn't budge. Pain shot through his shoulder, and he stumbled backward, collapsing onto the cold floor. Blood smeared across his palm from a gash on his hand. He stared at it, memories flooding back, the taunts, the isolation, Claire's laughter fading as she drifted toward Jake's crowd. Desperation twisted into anger. He wouldn't be forgotten. Claire wandered into the empty library, the muffled chaos of the party fading behind her. She sank into a leather armchair, her thoughts spiraling. Jake's voice replayed in her mind. He'll be fine. But what if he wasn't? Her chest tightened as she recalled the flash of fear in Ethan's eyes. She'd betrayed him, just as everyone else had. The door creaked open and Jake sauntered in, a drink in hand. "Hiding, are we?" he teased. Claire's jaw clenched. "What if something happens to Ethan?" she demanded. Jake rolled his eyes. "You worry too much. He's a big boy." But his dismissiveness only fueled her unease. Claire's fingers curled around the edge of a bookshelf as she glared at Jake. "Why do you always do this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Turn everything into some sick game?" Jake's grin faded. "Careful, Claire. You're sounding ungrateful." "Grateful?" she spat. "For what? Being part of your little puppet show?" Jake leaned closer, his voice low. "You know, Ethan told me something interesting once." He paused, savoring her discomfort. "He had a thing for you. Cute, right?" Claire's stomach dropped. "Why would he tell you that?" Jake's eyes gleamed. "People tell me a lot of things, and I use them wisely." Her skin prickled with humiliation and anger. Fueled by a surge of rage, Claire squared her shoulders. "This isn't funny anymore, Jake. You've gone too far." Jake's expression darkened. "You think you're better than me?" He sneered. "Newsflash. Your perfect family isn't so perfect." Claire froze. "What are you talking about?" He leaned in, his voice venomous. "Your dad's little business trips? Not exactly business, are they?" Her breath hitched, the truth cut deep, unraveling her composure. But instead of crumbling, she stood taller. "You don't own me, Jake. And you sure as hell don't own this group." The confrontation had drawn a crowd. Sophia, Lucas, and the others watched in stunned silence. "Claire's right," Lucas said, stepping forward. "This isn't cool anymore." Sophia hesitated but nodded. Maybe Jake's not the king of the world after all. Jake's mask of control cracked. "You're all pathetic," he snarled. "You need me." But the seeds of doubt had already taken root. As the group splintered, a faint sound cut through the tension. A weak, desperate pounding from the basement. Claire's heart leapt. "Ethan," she whispered. No one else seemed to hear it, their voices still raised in argument. She broke into a run, ignoring Jake's shouts. The sound grew louder as she neared the hidden room. Pressing her ear to the door, she heard his voice hoarse and broken. "Help. Please." Tears blurred her vision as she fumbled with the lock. "I'm here, Ethan. I'm getting you out." The weight of guilt lifted just enough for determination to take its place. Morning after. The sobering realization. The morning sunlight streamed through shattered windows, illuminating the aftermath of the wild party. Empty bottles littered the floor, and the air was thick with the stale scent of spilled liquor. The once pristine mansion was now a scene of chaos. "Where's Ethan?" A voice croaked from the couch, cutting through the groans of hungover teenagers. Claire's eyes shot open, her heart racing. Memories of the night before came rushing back. The prank, the laughter, the pounding on the hidden room door. She sat up, panic gripping her chest. "We need to find him. Now." The search begins. A growing sense of dread. The group stumbled to their feet, splitting up to search the mansion. Anxiety thickened the air as each room they checked yielded no sign of Ethan. Claire's breath hitched as she retraced their steps from the night before. The faint sound she had heard in the chaos echoed in her mind. "Ethan!" she called, her voice cracking. Silence answered. The bloodstains, a chilling discovery. Claire and two others pushed open the door to the hidden room. The metallic tang of blood hit their noses immediately. "Oh my God," whispered a girl behind Claire. Bloodstains smeared the floor, dark and ominous against the cold tiles. The room was empty, but the evidence of struggle was undeniable. "He's hurt," Claire said, her voice trembling. "We need to call someone." Jake stepped forward, his face a mask of indifference. "No one's calling anyone. We'll handle this." The argument. Claire versus Jake. Claire's fear turned to fury. "Handle this? Are you insane? He could be dying." Jake's eyes narrowed. "You think the cops are going to believe this was just a prank? We're all screwed if this gets out." "You're more worried about your reputation than Ethan's life?" Claire spat. "You're disgusting." Some of the group shifted uncomfortably. A few murmured agreements, while others clung to Jake's words out of fear. Claire's revelation. The recording. Claire pulled her phone from her pocket, her thumb hovering over the screen. "I recorded you last night, Jake. You admitted to locking him in there. I swear I'll show this to the police if you don't cooperate." Jake's composure cracked, revealing a simmering rage. "You think you can blackmail me?" he sneered. The attack. Jake's desperation. In a blur of motion, Jake lunged at Claire, his face twisted with fury. She stumbled backward, but before he could reach her, two of the boys grabbed him, wrestling him to the ground. "Get off me!" Jake roared, thrashing against their grip. Claire's chest heaved as she stood her ground. "This is over, Jake." The shocking twist. Ethan is found. A faint groan cut through the chaos. The group froze. "Did you hear that?" Claire whispered. They followed the sound to a hidden passageway behind a panel in the wall. Ethan lay crumpled on the floor, pale and barely conscious, his clothes stained with blood. "Ethan!" Claire dropped to her knees beside him, tears streaming down her face. "Help is coming, I promise." The sight of him silenced the group, their petty arguments forgotten. Ethan's accusation. The final blow. Paramedics arrived, the blaring sirens cutting through the mansion's heavy silence. As they lifted Ethan onto a stretcher, he opened his eyes, his voice a rasp. "It was Jake," he croaked. "He said he'd make me pay." Gasps rippled through the group. Jake's face turned ashen as the weight of Ethan's words sank in. Claire watched in stunned silence as the paramedics carried Ethan away. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. Jake's face remains expressionless as the officer cuffs his wrists behind his back. The sound of the metal clicking shut echoes louder than the murmurs spreading through the gathering crowd. His parents, pale and stunned, stand frozen on the porch steps. Photographers line the sidewalk, flashes igniting a media frenzy that will haunt the town for years. Jake Reynolds, you're under arrest, the officer declares, his voice steady. You have the right to remain silent. The words blur as Claire watches from across the street, heart pounding. Parents clutch their children protectively, neighbors exchanging hushed whispers. Some glare at Jake in righteous fury, others look conflicted, as if struggling to reconcile the monster he's become with the golden boy they once knew. Jake's mother steps forward. There must be some mistake, she pleads. He's just a kid. The officer's face hardens. Tell that to the boy in the hospital. Claire grips her phone tightly, the weight of what she's done sinking in. Justice has a price and everyone is paying. The prosecutor holds Claire's phone in gloved hands, displaying the recording to the packed courtroom. Jake's voice crackles through the speakers, mocking, cruel, and undeniably guilty. Locking him up was just for fun. Jake's voice sneers. The idiot deserved it. Gasps ripple through the audience. Claire's stomach churns as parents and teachers exchange shocked glances. How had they missed this side of Jake? How had she? Jake's lawyer rises, smoothing his tailored suit. This was a prank gone wrong. Nothing more, he argues, voice slick with practiced charm. The prosecutor counters sharply. This recording is not just evidence of a prank. It's proof of malicious intent. Claire's throat tightens. The weight of betrayal presses heavy on her chest. She's done the right thing, hasn't she? Then why does it feel like she's torn everything apart? The steady beep of monitors fills the sterile hospital room. Ethan lies pale and gaunt, bandages covering his arms and torso. His parents sit vigil by his side, their faces etched with exhaustion and pain. How's he doing? Claire's voice trembles as she stands at the doorway. Mrs. Hayes glances up, eyes red-rimmed. Physically? He'll heal. But inside? She shakes her head, her voice breaking. They've taken something from him. Claire swallows the lump in her throat. Flashbacks plague Ethan. The darkness of the room, the pounding terror, the betrayal by those he trusted. She wishes she could undo it, but wishes change nothing. Claire steps into Ethan's hospital room, guilt twisting her insides. He watches her wearily, his eyes dull with pain. Hey, she says softly, her voice faltering. He doesn't respond. She moves closer, heart racing. Ethan, I'm so sorry. Her voice cracks. I should have stopped it. I should have done something. Ethan's jaw tightens. Why didn't you? Tears blur her vision. I was scared, but that's no excuse. Silence stretches between them, heavy and suffocating. I forgive you, he says finally, though his voice lacks warmth. But things will never be the same. Claire nods, accepting the truth. Some wounds never fully heal. The courtroom is a battleground. Jake's parents have hired the best defense team money can buy. Suits and ties clash with Ethan's family's quiet determination. The defense lawyer paces confidently. My client is a victim of mob mentality, he declares. A promising young man who made a mistake. Ethan's father rises, voice steady, despite the weight of grief. Your client nearly killed my son, he says firmly. Privilege doesn't excuse cruelty. The community watches, divided. Some cling to the image of Jake as the town's golden boy. Others demand accountability. The trial is more than a fight for justice. It's an indictment of a system that favors the powerful. Claire walks through the school hallway, whispers trailing behind her. Her former friends avoid her gaze. Jake's loyalists glare. Others look at her with a mix of pity and admiration. She stops at her locker, exhaling slowly. No more blind loyalty. No more following the crowd. Her phone buzzes with a text from an old friend. You're brave. She deletes it. She doesn't need validation anymore. Later, she sits across from a therapist, voice steady but raw. I let things go too far, she admits, but I want to understand why. The therapist nods. That's a good place to start. The youth center buzzes with laughter and chatter. Claire stands by the activity table, helping a shy boy with an art project. You're doing great, she encourages, smiling. He grins tentatively. Really? She nods. Absolutely. Sharing her story with these kids isn't easy, but it's worth it. If she can prevent just one of them from feeling as isolated as Ethan did, it's enough. A colleague approaches. You're making a real difference, Claire. She smiles faintly. Trying to, she says, determination shining in her eyes. The school parking lot is quiet as Ethan loads the last of his bags into the car. Claire stands a few feet away, heart heavy. So, this is it? She asks, voice barely audible. Ethan nods. Yeah, I need a fresh start. She bites her lip. I get it. I wish things were different. He looks at her, a flicker of pain in his eyes. Me too. The engine starts and Claire steps back. As the car pulls away, she watches until it disappears down the road. The chapter has closed, but the scars remain, etched into their lives forever. Claire sat motionless on the edge of her bed, the dim glow of the bedside lamp casting long shadows across the room. Her fingers trembled as they traced invisible patterns on her jeans, mind churning with fragments of memories that refused to fade. The laughter, once bright and carefree, now echoed hollowly in her mind, twisted and distorted by guilt. She squeezed her eyes shut, but it only made the images sharper. Jake's smug grin. Jake's smug grin. Ethan's lifeless gaze when they found him. The blood, sticky and dark against pristine floors. Fear had dictated her choices that night, forcing her into silence. But fear didn't absolve her. It never would. A lump formed in her throat, heavy with self-loathing. Claire knew who she had become, a bystander, someone complicit by omission. And now, as the weight of those choices bore down on her, she hated herself for it. The pen felt foreign in her hand, its weight both insignificant and monumental. Claire stared at the blank page before her, the white expanse mocking her hesitation. What could she possibly say that mattered? What words could undo the harm inflicted? Taking a shaky breath, she pressed the pen to paper. The first words came slowly, hesitant scratches against the silence. Ethan, I don't know if you'll ever read this, maybe you shouldn't, but I need to say it, even if it's just to this page. Her handwriting faltered, the ink bleeding slightly as her hand trembled. I was wrong, for standing by, for not speaking up when I should have. I let fear control me, and you paid the price. Tears blurred her vision, but she forced herself to keep going. Thank you for forgiving me, or trying to. I don't deserve it, but I'll carry that grace with me, even if I never earn it. She paused, heart pounding. There was so much more she wanted to say, but words felt inadequate. Still, she wrote on, hoping that maybe, just maybe, this would be the first step toward making peace with herself. Claire set the pen down, staring at the letter filled with raw, unfiltered truth. Her chest felt lighter but still constricted by a lingering ache. Folding the paper carefully, she slipped it into an envelope and sealed it. The adhesive tasted bitter on her tongue, a fitting punishment for the bitterness she carried inside. The lessons of that night would never leave her. She knew that now. Doing nothing was just as damaging as doing harm, sometimes worse. The betrayal hadn't been Jake's alone. It had been hers too, etched into every moment of silence when she could have spoken up. Claire's fingers traced the edge of the envelope, her resolve hardening. How many others had stayed quiet out of fear? How many more would suffer because of it? Never again, she whispered to herself. Never. As Claire stood by the window, the cold glass pressing against her forehead, she watched the world outside, people moving through their lives, unaware of the storm raging within her. Her gaze drifted to the sealed letter resting on the desk. It was a small gesture, but one that mattered. She took a deep breath, her voice barely audible, but resolute. "We all have a choice," she said softly. "To be the one who locks the door or the one who opens it." The words hung in the air, a haunting truth she would carry forever. Some choices destroyed lives. Others saved them. The question was, who do you choose to be?